Welcome to the Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. We're here to share stories of real river accidents and rescues and find expert advice on how to solve the problems you might encounter in the Whitewater River environment. I'm your host, Jack Diddy, an emergency medicine physician, whitewater paddler, and wilderness medicine educator. Together, I hope we can celebrate successful rescues and learn from our mistakes in a supportive environment. If you have a story to share of a non-fatal accident or rescue, send me an email at thesafetybreak@gmail.com or contact me on our Facebook page, The Safety Break. If you like what you hear, hit the subscribe button and follow us on social media. I hope you learned something valuable in the show. For whitewater paddlers, the Cumberland Plateau is a unique geological gift. It's a huge area that extends from Kentucky through east central Tennessee and into northern Alabama and Georgia. The plateau is uplifted about 1,000 feet above the surrounding region, and water is cut through the sandstone and limestone to create magnificent gorges, strange rock features and arches, and enormous caves. And in the whitewater paddling world, interesting geology can lead to interesting dangers. Many of the creeks and rivers are riddled with undercuts and sieves. In my early paddling days, I remember watching Wayne Gentry's videos featuring a lot of the steep creeks of this region. If you want to see what cutting-edge kayaking on the plateau looked like in the early 1990s, check out his film Vertical Addiction, which is available on YouTube. From this, you get a good sense of the hazards on some of these runs. The bottom line is, when you paddle the steep creeks of the Cumberland Plateau, as Doug Wellman says in the video, you've got to be on top of your game out there. Fortunately for mere mortals, there's some mellower runs on the plateau as well. One of the best of these is the Big South Fork of the Cumberland River. It's a medium-sized river flowing through a cliff-lined wilderness in northern Tennessee and into Kentucky. It's often used as a stepping stone for paddlers to advance from the Class 2 to 3 world into the Class 3 to 4 world. And while it's not free from risk, most of the rapids have straightforward entrances with opportunities for scouting and big recovery pools below. It's a great place to play, push your limits, and learn. The paddler in our story today was doing just that. His name is Clay Eggers from Lexington, Kentucky. He'd been stepping up his game over the past year, trying new and different rivers and having a real fast progression through the whitewater learning curve until this incident on the Big South Fork. We'll get to his story in a few minutes. First, we'll hear from Kirk Edelman. Kirk is a longtime paddler from Knoxville, Tennessee, and kayak instructor with Ace Kayaking School. Many of you know him as the author of the definitive guidebook for the region, Whitewater of the Southern Appalachians. He was not involved in the incident in this episode, but has a huge volume of experience paddling and instructing on the Cumberland Plateau, so I thought we should hear his opinion of the place. Here's his thoughts about the Big South Fork.
It's an amazing run. It's full of these huge sandstone boulders, massive 1 to 200-foot cliffs, like way up on the side of the canyon. That's actually where all these boulders have tumbled from. The units are so thick that the boulders are huge, and when they fall down in the river, that's really what creates all the interesting rapids on the Big South Fork, is just these big sandstone blocks. And it's interesting because it's this river that, like, all the rapids are either Class 2 or Class 3, and then you have like a 3+ and, an arguable 4 minus, whatever. So it's really kind of a 2-3 river, but it's also way more dangerous and finicky than almost all the other 2-3. Like if you compare it to FB9, I guess both of those runs are 2 to 3+, right? Like we could, in some universe, give them the same stamp, in a guidebook, right? Yet they're so vastly different as far as the difficulty and like the amount of skill required to pick lines and stay out of trouble.
Before his career as a kayak instructor, Kirk worked as a geologist and had an interesting perspective on how the rock morphology affects the features we find in the rapids of this region.
Shape, size, and friction all have like something to do with, you throw a bunch of boulders at different geologies, in a ditch, which ones are going to be more dangerous than the others, which ones are going to have more voids in between them naturally. The the bigger they are, often the bigger the spaces under them can be. And in the case of the Big South Fork, even some of the sieves are so big that you just paddle through them. And it's just kind of fun. You just, at low enough water, you can paddle through them. Smaller sieves can actually be more dangerous because they're more likely to entrap you either in or out of your boat. And it's got a lot of medium-sized boulders as well. But the friction, like sandstone is made of sand, and so is sandpaper, right? So really the surface of these rocks is like sandpaper. It's like coarse grit. It's a little abusive, but it's just grabby, right? So every time you hit one of these sandstone boulders, your boat's going to slow down. It's going to experience that friction. And so whatever possible pin configuration could happen, the slower the boat's going, the closer you are to being pinned, right? So the friction slows boats down. Just that coarse grained sandstone, it's probably even coarser than the golly. The golly is like a slightly finer grained sandstone. But yeah, I think a lot of folks get taken aback by the northern Cumberland Plateau sandstones. They tend to have a lot of conglomerate, a lot of even like pebbles and ancient quartz crystals in them, and just iron concretions, iron bands that it's a really grabby style of rock. And the way these big boulders just fall in from the rim, they're all like kind of tend to be box, rectangular, square shapes. If you just drop a bunch of that stuff in a riverbed, you tend to get a lot of voids. Most of these boulders come from the rim. They actually haven't traveled very far. Whereas if you go to the Smokies, most of the rocks in the Big Creek, West Prong, Tremont, any of these creeks in the Smokies and the Blue Ridge Mountains, all those boulders have traveled a long distance. And what's happened is the longer these rocks are transported down a river, the more rounded they become. And the more rounded they become, the less space that can exist in between them. So if you put a bunch of marbles in a jar, the space in between those marbles is actually, they pack together quite well and create very little space. But if you break a bunch of dinner plates and throw them in there, or just put a bunch of like irregular shaped blocks, the space in between is going to be vastly greater. And I think that's like an overarching theme here is when you throw a bunch of these boulders together, what's the proportion of empty space that's created? And then you have to just sprinkle in randomness, right? Like you can have a pile of these rocks that just happens to be really pretty friendly, no bad spots. If there are bad spots, the flow's not going towards them. Conversely, you can have a pile of these rocks that just all work together to create a bad situation.
So let's get to the bad situation. This is Clay Eggers with his story from the late fall of last year.
So my name is Clay Eggers, and I'm a Lexington, Kentucky local. Lived here my whole life and kind of grew up Whitewater adjacent, I always say. Mom and dad paddled a lot around Tennessee, East Tennessee, and just that area growing up. Moved to Lexington when I was younger and joined the Bluegrass Wildwater Association. So important to my story because, my experience with whitewater up until this year has been rafting. We'd raft the Nolichucky at least a couple times every year. I'd rafted the New, and I think I had rafted the Echoid, although I just don't really remember it too much. Well, Helene came around. I just got thinking about it all fall, all winter. Like, man, I never got to kayak the Nolichucky, and that was kind of weighing on me. My mom encouraged me and reminded me that it's like, Hanley and everyone in the BWA still does rowing practice, Clay. Why aren't you doing that? It's like, you're right. For work, I do Christmas lights in the season. So this is like January, February. I have a really slow time. So I was like, Friday nights, I'll just go do roll practice. That sounds great. So picked that up. Julian was in our party on the Big South Fork during this event, but she helped me get my roll down and just solidified it, fell in love with it really fast and just progressed where I could. I went to the pool until it got warm enough to go do the Elkhorn. And then we had this crazy flood year where we've just gotten so many good opportunities to run the Elkhorn. So I got laps on laps on laps. And then suddenly it was April and I was like, man, I've spent every week for 2 months now. I haven't skipped a week without getting in a boat. This feels like I'm getting good practice in. My skills were still pretty minimal. We did a BWA clinic on the lower Russell Fork, pinball, meat grinder, that kind of stuff. And that to that point was like the best weekend of my life. And I was like, okay, I think I'm good for the Nolichucky now. Kind of rushed into it, got on the Nolichucky, had another best weekend of my life. Like, this is awesome. How can I keep it going? Put a feeler out there on Facebook and found some, people in the club going to the Ocoee, and they showed me down. Another best weekend of my life, and just like really, really quickly fell in love with hard boat paddling, and got 24 laps on the Ocoee this summer in a matter of like 11 weekends. I am broke right now. I spent so much time on the Ocoee just getting reps in, and then got the new in West Virginia a couple weeks before Golly Fest, trying to feel out if I was ready for the lower Golly. I went with just plans of doing the lower Golly, have the best weekend of my life. So I was like, let's keep it going. Let's do the upper. I did my first descent on the upper Golly, and then I kind of found my ceiling. I was like, my skills have gotten me this far. I'm comfortable getting through the upper Golly, feeling like I'm not dying, but the lower Golly is like my sweet spot. I love that level of boating. I love big water, big wave trains. My friends take a lot of time waiting in the eddy lines to learn how to stern squirt and stuff like that. So started to learn how to do tailies and paddling a full slice. I've been paddling like my dad's Wave Sport Ace for most of the season. And I think that helped me dial in a lot of good skills, paddling in 3 dimensions, figuring out how to use my tail, my bow, and use them to my advantage, use them to mess around and do stupid, funny-looking tricks. And so that's been most of my experiences, is kind of like bigger water, like rapids and stuff like that, not a whole lot of creaky stuff. So, I had a list of rivers that I wanted to do this year. Nolichucky was obviously number one, but Golly, Ocoee, Lower Russell Fork. The last one on my list was the Big South Fork, and I was starting to feel like I wasn't going to get an opportunity to paddle it. But I had a small rewind and ended up like the stars aligned. People were talking about Big South Fork, so we just went for it. It was first day in November. The weather was nice. The weather was, pretty fall, like 50 degrees range. And, weeks before that, I had gotten this old Kokatat dry top from like 2009. We redid the gaskets on it, and that had been fine to that point. But my buddy decided I might be better off in his kind of newer NRS dry top. So that was one of the things that we did right, was I got equipped with a little bit better gear. We did Burnt Mill to Leatherwood. So Burnt Mill was pretty creaky and shallow. It was running about, I think, 850 CFS that day. So we put on at Burnt Mill, paddled this kind of mellow, creaky stuff. So got to the confluence, started getting into the bigger stuff in the canyon. One of the prettiest paddles I've ever done. Get into the canyon area, and then get to the first of the big 3 rapids is Double Drop.
The Big South Fork proper starts at the confluence of the Clear Fork and the New River of Tennessee. To run the gorge section, most trips either put in on the Clear Fork as described there by Clay, or are put in at the confluence itself. Either way, it's a pretty mellow run until you get to the first of the real rapids, Double Drop. Most of the flow is on the river right side, and there's an obvious horizon line for the first ledge, with a good scouting eddy on the right.
Just to zoom out, Double Drop is 2 ledges in quick succession on the river right side of the Big South Fork. This huge pile of boulders that have fallen from the rim kind of constrict the river, and most of the flow is on the right side. And it drops over maybe like a 3-foot pour over, and then you've got kind of just this aerated run out tongue that then goes off a diagonal ledge. And that diagonal ledge feeds downstream river right into what I would call a pinch sieve. It's interesting. It's not like a boulder sieve where water's like siphoning and whirlpooling down through a gap. It's really, you've got this ledge below the second ledge that's mostly underwater, and it's a boulder that sticks almost all the way to the right bank, but there's a gap about 8 inches, 10 inches in between the boulders on the bank and this low ledge rock. And at high flow, all this stuff just downstream is you're choked in between 2 house-sized boulders. And so very little changes in flow on this river. If you just add 100 CFS on the gauge at the takeout, these boulders constrict the flow so much that they drown the bottom of that second ledge. In fact, at 2,500, there's no second ledge. Even the defined diagonal ledge is under, because these boulders downstream pinch and raise the pool level dramatically in there. What that also means, though, is you can go there at 1,100 on Sunday, and then Monday do another lap at 1,000. And even though it's only 100 CFS difference, this choke point downstream of this sieve allows the water to really drop out fast. And so all of a sudden, this midstream rock becomes exposed, and the outflow, it basically pushes back on that outflow coming out of the diagonal ledge, and none of it goes over that rock. It all pushes right into this pinch sieve. And at the surface, it looks like it's about 10 inches gap, which is clearly not enough for a boat. But I've dangled my leg in there from time to time when I'm setting safety and notice that it opens up. It's like a bell shape. It opens up a little bit. So what that means is, like, all this water is getting pulled with a lot of force through that pinch, but also under the pinch. And below 1,000, it's all going in there. And to further complicate it, I think it is a really tricky line, because one of the pitfalls when we're scouting a rapid, we identify a hazard. So if there's an undercut, say on the right, I'm going to run far left. But that doesn't actually work in whitewater, because oftentimes the best way to miss a hazard is to be right next to it, or to be in an eddy above it and hairy-fairy out and away with your momentum heading away. So really, when I'm scouting and figuring out how I'm going to run lines, very often it's going to be much safer for me to be close to a hazard with my momentum leaving and getting further away from it than it is to be far away in proximity with all the momentum going right into it. And so folks try to stay left on second drop at double drop to avoid the right, but that's actually how you go right. Because you go left, you drop into this huge, powerful kicker, and it just typewriters you all the way over the river right. So the actual good line there at 1,000 or less is actually to run very close to the sieve, because there's a crowned dome of slab rock that you can skip over. And then you actually skip over the hole that's all kicking into that sieve, because you don't drop your bow. Whereas if you try to run left and have more proximity from the sieve, you drop into this, you're going to go deep, hit the diagonal, get kicked. So there's a counterintuition about this, how to best avoid this sieve. It's actually quite easy to set safety there too, because you can actually, if you're careful, and sometimes it might be good if it's your first time doing this, you definitely, maybe anytime, it doesn't hurt to have a second person with a hand on your PFD, or maybe a tether on your, they got you tethered so you don't actually fall into the sieve. But you can stand with one foot on the bank, and I usually just scrub with my foot out on this rock that creates the pinch sieve. I just scrub away whatever algae's collected, get a good grip, feel like I'm on, and then I can stand there. And if people drop into that diagonal and get surfed across into that sieve, I can do two things. One, I can shoo them away. I can just shoo them back over the other side. And the other option is, as they're going into the sieve, I'll grab their bow and actually fall backwards into the pool below and just keep them from loading. Because once someone goes into that sieve, the stern's going to load, and it's going to take a few seconds to pull them backwards and under. And it actually brings the bow up to you, and you just grab their bow, lever them over before it has a chance to really sink its teeth in. But even that's exciting. And like, I want my success rate not to be defined by whether someone pulled me out of a sieve, but whether I was able to stay out of that sieve in the first place. That's a little bit on double drop.
I guess you can figure out by now what kind of trouble Clay's about to get into here.
So here's where the real story starts. So we did a lot right. We got out to scout it. We had a lot of new boaters with us too. It was, I think, 4 of us, RPFD, on the Big South Fork. So we decided to get out and scout it. We almost did that right. So I got out of my boat and I went up to the first drop and I was like, yep. And I got back in my boat and I did not really walk down to go get a better look at the sieve. I should have, but it was roughly explained to us. Samson did give us some beta before that, but I think I kind of missed a little bit of leftward angle coming off the second drop. I think we just identified there's some mank on river right. And I don't really remember thinking in my head, like, hit it with some leftward angle. I know that left looks pretty bad too, but it's better than that right. And, I was confident. I paddled a couple like lower class 5 rapids before. I'm like, this is a class 3 in the books. Like, I should be good. Was a little cocky about it and watched Alex's line. Samson was standing a little further up the bank, just, phone in hand, getting some video. And Alex Wagner ends up running the rapid first. So Samson kind of set safety. I think he had a throw rope in hand, but really we trust Alex to go run it first, and he was just kind of getting video. But Alex runs it first to kind of show us the line. I paddle up to it and go off the first drop just fine. But I think I landed okay, but I felt like I was getting pushed to river right on the second drop. And I wanted to see if I could eddy out and wait before going over the second drop. So I kind of did some weird bracing on my left side and tried to overcorrect and go to more of river left. Well, before going over second drop, I straightened out, and I think bracing like that just made me lose all my speed. And I wasn't expecting that boil just to be so aggressive. So I boofed into it, and my memory to that part was a little foggy. It happened so fast. I got rolled, and immediately when I rolled, that rapid just kind of typewriters you to river right into the sieve, and I was upside down. I guess I back into the sieve with the tail of my rewind going into that crack right there. I popped and once I felt, I would have gone for my roll, but I felt my boat jam immediately, and it felt like stuck in such a way that my roll wasn't going to do anything. And I popped my skirt and immediately felt like my bow get sucked down. I tried to push out of my boat. I got turned in such a way where my right leg was stuck in the boat, and the boat came upstream of me and pushed me down into this crack. So more or less like pushed me into the sieve. That happened so fast. And then the memory from that point was very vivid. Like I had my eyes open. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. It was just bubbles. And I remember like my leg was so stuck that I couldn't move it. My boat was so heavy that I could not push it off of me. And I could not like get my arms behind me and push myself up on this rock. And I remember sticking my hand up to see where the air was, and I felt air like roughly on my wrist of my left hand. My right arm was bruised up, and I feel like my paddle might have still been with me. I think my paddle was kind of pinning me with my boat too. I've got some bruising just like on my bicep and forearm right there. So I think that's where my paddle was. Not positive on that, but I remember feeling calmer than I probably should have. You kind of go into this weird Zen state if you're like holding your breath for a long time in a situation like that. I guess that's better than panicking, but I remember just kind of being calm, thinking like, okay, I've got some time. I got a good breath of air. Like, let me think about how I can maneuver myself out of here. And I just could not. I could not budge. I could not move. I could not figure it out. And then I was down there for so long, I just started thinking about like, damn, these thigh hooks are crazy. Like, should I try to figure out how to like break my shin, my leg, and force out of here? I wonder what the walkout on this river is like, at this section of the rapid. And then I tried again. I put my arms behind me and tried to push up towards the air, and then I felt myself sliding up. Well, I get almost up. It's moving slow. I turn my head downstream to see if I can try to create like an air pocket in my helmet. And then I hear Alex yelling at me to push my boat off of me. And then I realize it's not me that's pushing myself out of this situation. It's Alex pulling me by my shoulder straps up and out on that rock. So he was in his boat at the bottom. This man wet exited, ditched the boat, scrambled up on the rocks in a matter of, 30 seconds or less, and had been pulling me out. Keep in mind, Samson was standing on the shore too, closer to the first drop, and he made it around to me like just shortly after. And it took the two of them to pull me out and push me back and take a seat there. I remember just like sitting down, watching my boat. I watched shoes float out of my boat. I watched some pogies go on, and I was just kind of like wide-eyed staring like at my boat. I like looked back upstream to the other like 7 people up there, and they were looking at me like I was an alien making first contact. And it felt really weird and surreal, and like I couldn't believe that rapid was like that. It didn't look like anything bigger than, like double suck on the Ocoee or, big holes like that. It's just at that level, the sieve was like perfectly poured over. So you couldn't see how deep that crack went. Like when I was standing vertical in that crack, my feet weren't touching anything. I still don't know how deep that crack goes. It's pretty deep. The American Whitewater site shows that crack too. Looks like it's significantly out of water. My video just looks like it's a little rock getting poured over. So it seemed kind of deceptive. But yeah, that was really the event. Like all I saw was the underwater perspective. I don't know how much of a big deal it was. And they reassured me. They said, dude, all we saw were like 2 inches of your rewind and your hands sticking out. So that's pretty serious. I went back and looked at my video of it. It just looks so sneaky. Like, I'm hoping. I haven't had a chance to paddle anything after that, and kind of playing with an idea of going down to the Nolichucky this weekend. But I'm worried I'm going to be in my head about it after seeing something like that really doesn't look like there's anything to it, and just getting like sucked into it. I mean, my friends on shore said like they saw me go upside down. They're like, Clay's got a solid roll. And then I just get sucked like downward into the riverbed. And Zoe said like Samson just had like a weird scream reaction when that happened, and just ran down the banks to try to get to me. But like no one expected that. No one really, I think if they had known it could do anything close to that, we would have had better beta on the rapid and scouted it better. And we had some boaters that are newer than I was down there too. So, a good bit of beginner crew. And, to look back on the American Whitewater site and see that rapid's a class 3+, I'm like, that's a little disappointing. I don't know about class 3+. At 800, I think you could call it a class 4, but it's all open for interpretation sometimes.
One of the things that most interests me about this story is his concept of how we view and interpret the rating of rapids. Not far downstream of Double Drop is a rapid called the L, which many paddlers consider to be a little more intimidating and difficult than Double Drop.
The L is kind of considered a class 4 by most folks. That's the biggest rated rapid on the river, but in reality, you're going to make it to the bottom, and you're probably just going to flip over. And the flip potential's high, but unless the water at low water, there's really not much of a risk at the bottom of this rapid that's rated harder than Double Drop. Double Drop, these rapids got rated 3+ and 4 by some guy 30 years ago, and like that's still the numbers we're using, but it just doesn't tell the story at all. The L I would describe as a big, burly, hard to run clean rapid with low consequences. And I would call Double Drop harder than it looks and really working against you. And like, you can give someone that kind of information. It's got tells them more about what they're dealing with than just like these numbers.
The Class 1 to 6 rating system, called the International Scale of River Difficulty, is nice in its simplicity and generality. It can basically give you a rough idea of what to expect on a new run. But no numerical rating system can confer the complexities of the whitewater environment and all of the specific factors that may be in play for a particular rapid or river. A Class 4 rapid on a wilderness run in Idaho during the cold spring runoff can feel quite a bit different than a Class 4 on the warm waters of the Ocoee in July, with enormously different consequences for a mistake. And we often define ourselves as a certain class of paddler based on our past successes. But this doesn't take into account the changes of conditioning, practice, stress, fatigue, injury, or other factors that can all change our suitability to paddle on any given day. I've seen many off-the-couch former Class 5 paddlers eat shit in Class 3 and 4 rapids, and as I get older, I've found myself in that scenario more than a few times. The river certainly doesn't care who we think we are. The other important concept from this story is that life-threatening hazards can and do exist in any moving water, regardless of difficulty rating, especially if you stray from the normally paddled line through the drop. I can think of many places where a deadly sieve or pin hazard lurks just a few feet from an otherwise straightforward move, even in Class 2 to 3 rapids. Our best defense against these places is to learn how to read water well and identify these spots, and being meticulous with our scouting of rapids. Kirk describes how he approaches this type of problem with his kayak students.
It's good to learn how to see problem spots, even if they're not in the line, right? Because it's an opportunity to practice identifying features and deciding to yourself, how big of a deal is this? A lot of times they're out of the line. But then you decide, are there any hazards we're exposed to if we're trying to like travel this path through the rapid? And then we just start looking at how hard is it to hit the line? How bad do we think the consequences are? What's our gut on what's the over under on hitting it, right? And then just kind of getting a little analytical about how much risk we're taking, how confident we are we can hit it, and then we kind of make a decision. I try to walk people towards the point where it's obvious to them what the decision is. So often we see a result of someone scouting a rapid is they just weren't sure if they wanted to run it or not. And usually in that situation, we just haven't taken a deep enough dive into looking at everything. And a lot of times once we've done that, it's obvious. It's like, oh yeah, you're right. I'm cool with the consequences. I'm pretty sure I can hit the line. And this is a great opportunity to test myself in an uncertain environment. And then other times we just immediately arrive to the decision of like, yeah, I don't actually know that I can hit that move. And I've had trouble with that move in the past. And this could be like a bad experience if I blow it. So easy decision. You want to move to where it's a pretty easy decision. A common thing I often hear is, man, I don't know if I want to scout this rapid too long because the longer I stand here and look at it, the more I'm not going to want to run it. And that is always a warning sign to me that we're simply dealing with a situation where this person has not practiced scouting enough to move past that. And there's not any grizzled veteran Class 5 expedition paddlers out there that would say that, right? They would say, no, I guess we just need to look at it as long as we need to look at it, right? So I think you have to just start slowing down and looking at stuff, really being intentional, like sit in the eddy for a minute and decide exactly what you're going to do and why. And then when you get to the bottom, have that post analysis of like, how well did I do? All that kind of sounds obvious to say. But I think often we're not doing good postmortems on like, not just the big bad things that happen, but all the non-events that could have happened that maybe we didn't, set protection for. We just kind of rolled through and everything worked out.
As we learn new skills, it's hard to recognize our own blind spots. I feel like Clay's story could have happened to any of us as we move through the whitewater learning curve. In fact, I'm embarrassed to say that despite dozens of runs on the Big South Fork in the early days of my paddling career, I never knew of this sieve until my interview with Clay.
You think about all the instances where this has happened to someone at this particular spot on the Big South Fork, and we're probably not aware of how many times that's happened. And so we're in the situation where people regularly discover the seriousness of a spot over and over, but that info really isn't getting passed on. You zoom out and look at that from 30,000 feet, and it's not a super proud process that we've got here.
So how can we help improve this process? In addition to careful scouting and improving our water reading skills, we really just have to help each other out. Consider taking a brief moment with your group at the put-in for a quick discussion of known hazards on a run, especially if you have some first-timers present. And if you experience a significant river accident, especially one that highlights a hidden danger like this one, consider contributing it to the AW database. It's probably the best centralized trove of river hazard information that we have. The final portion of Clay's audio recording was glitched, but to summarize the rest of his story, he was uninjured and his crew was able to extricate his boat and most of his gear, and he went on to paddle the rest of the river that day without incident. He recognized a lot of the lessons we've already discussed and also mentioned another important point. During his run of the rapid, he had his dry bag in his lap, and he felt that this, plus the aggressive thigh hooks in his boat, might have contributed to his inability to escape immediately. Finally, he expressed his sincere thanks to his friends Alex Wagner and Samson Reed for saving his life, and his gratitude to all of the great people in the BWA Paddling Club for their help with his paddling progression and experiences over the past year. So thanks to Clay Eggers and Kirk Edelman for their contributions to this episode. Spring paddling season is in full swing, and it's a great time of year to explore the Big South Fork. If you have time while you're there, take a half day to detour over to hike the Honey Creek Loop, or to the shorter Twin Arches Trail, to explore some amazing rock formations and contemplate what a wild planet we live on. Thanks again to listening to The Safety Break, and I hope to see you on the river. Thank you for listening to The Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button and click follow on our Facebook page so we know that you're out there. I'm also looking for more stories. If you know of an interesting non-fatal river accident or rescue, send me a few details by email, safetybreak@gmail.com. It doesn't have to be dramatic or life-threatening, just something that we all might be able to learn from. I'll see if we can turn it into an episode. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the river.